future. Get ready for the ride. We're going down to hell tonight, so strap yourself inside. There's a glaring contradiction in your world that's made of glass. Something small can shatter it and nail you to the past. The road beneath your wheels, the madness that you feel. Oh, you will pay with your life.
Welcome to another edition of Metal Voice, and we're here today with fellow heavy metal hoser himself, Martin Popoff, to talk about his brand new book, Whitesnake, Sail Away, Whitesnake's Fantastic Voyage.
How you doing, guys? Thanks for having me again.
Great stuff.
Martin, being a huge Whitesnake fan, I mean, I literally gobbled up this book in hours, and here's a subject matter, Whitesnake, you don't see on the bookshelf too often.
Yeah, I mean, normally when I do these books, I get more enthusiastic to do a whole book on a band if there hasn't been anything. And yeah, I'm very surprised. I mean, just like a lot of these British metal bands I talk about, I believe there was a slim volume from the 80s when they were big. It tends to happen with these bands. But otherwise, there's no books on Whitesnake. So I just thought, yeah, it's time to put all this together. I've interviewed most of these guys many times, and it seemed like a nice, succinct catalog that hadn't been explored yet.
And looking at Whitesnake, of course, you got so many vines from the tree of Deep Purple and Glenn Hughes and everything. Was it a bit challenging just to narrow it down to that the Whitesnake catalog?
Yeah, I mean, there is a little bit leading up to it because necessarily David Coverdale is such a huge part of this band. So I did include a little bit of preamble on his time in Deep Purple. Also, what I did, though, is it turned out, these books, you kind of run out of word count on these things. And I decided to essentially end the book in a profound way in terms of like writing lots and lots on each album with Slip of the Tongue. And then the last two albums, which are actually quite good, I more or less put into an epilogue situation. But there was plenty to write about just given all the hirings and firings in this band as we moved through all this time. And, the reason I subtitle it Fantastic Voyage is because it almost, just in the 80s alone, Whitesnake is a couple or three different bands.
But Martin, can we just say this is David Coverdale's solo band? I mean, what would be the difference between David Coverdale as a solo artist and Whitesnake? Is it just a certain sound? What is it? Is there a difference? And if so, what is it?
Well, certainly now, I mean, over the years, given that the lineups get even more, distorted in terms of it being David and a bunch of guys over what is it, like 25 years or so now, it is, you could say, yes, it is a David Coverdale solo band. But I mean, when it started out, it was a fairly steady lineup of writers for whatever 5 albums. Yeah. So I mean, it was definitely more of a band at that point. Later on, it does obviously get into this situation where there are these superstar guitarists plus David as we go along. But let's not forget. I mean, I guess their biggest album, the 1987 album, or the self-titled, it's David paired with a fairly strong personality and a big writer in John Sykes, the same way that Ozzy is paired throughout his career with these strong guitarists.
What I loved about this book, Martin, as usual, you go talk about each album, each song of every album, and your input on that. I don't think it was as in-depth as some of the other books you've done, like Rush, Grace Under Pressure. I mean, a lot of those songs, there was paragraphs and paragraphs written about the songs. Was there a reason to paring this book down a little bit more like that?
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, it's as long. It's actually longer than that book. But the truth of the matter is, absolutely, because you can only talk about David Coverdale's lyrics for 2 minutes.
It's baby, baby.
I didn't want to say anything, but
slow and easy, baby.
Exactly.
It can't get too much depth there.
Well,
I mean, this is a band that is writing a funny word that David uses is knees up rocker, right? Knees up ground or whatever that phrase is, right? But the fact of the matter is these are fairly simple 3.5 minute pop songs, in a heavy context, but they are so traditional in a lot of ways. I mean, they are literally a combination of blues, boogie rock, heavy metal riffing, and that pretty kiddie metal thing in the middle that is almost like a Twisted Sister Kiss kind of thing. So you mix all that together and it becomes a band that you don't really need to write a lot about on each song, but replacing that is there's a lot to write about in terms of production and all of these people in and out of the band, the inner band politics. So in essence, the manpower side of it replaces the words you spend on the song by song side of it.
Yeah. And looking at the albums themselves, I think one can argue, I mean, Ready and Willing is, an argument could be made, that's probably the best Whitesnake album.
Yeah, and a lot of people say that, and I kind of say that as well. But it's also, it's also the one that feels the most that it's deserving of critical acclaim. But it's not trying super hard to be an album that everybody loves, the way Slide It In is, or Whitesnake is, or even Slip of the Tongue. It's this classy, earthy, British, bluesy, hard rock album. It's got the classic lineup, John Lordy and Pace. I mean, it's the manpower on it is pretty stunning, and the production's great. It's one of Martin Birch's more kind of level-headed, classy, clean productions. It's very high fidelity, but again, it's still Whitesnake before that phase, or just before that phase, where they started to get that Kiss element in. Essentially, I mean, Saints and Sinners, not so much, but Come and Get It, certainly, Slide It In. Those, in my opinion, are the band's two Kiss albums.
Yeah. And like you said, Come and Get It, there was a certain laziness started creeping in the band. Maybe the fire wasn't burning as bright, even though they still hadn't hit America.
Yeah, exactly. And that, like I say, I mean, as a Kiss album or even as a Twisted Sister type album, it's just very simple. It's dry. It's compressed sounding. There's not a lot of complication to it. And it's the first one where you really do start to see an American sound. I mean, I believe that album is or was issued in the States. I don't think Saints and Sinners was issued in the States. I think that was the one kind of odd man out. And although the earlier ones were, there was this kind of dropout thing. But Come and Get It felt like the first one that was made for an American audience, although it was still more or less a bunch of English guys. It wasn't until Slide It In where they really said, right, all these ducks are getting put in a row. We're going to try, make this big assault on America, which is quite a, they did it more than almost any other kind of band. I mean, I suppose another one would be Def Leppard that you would compare them to.
Right, and like at that point, to Slide It In, I mean, you're right on. That's the first one that I came across in their catalog, and it's when, like John Colodner says, it's the time they got rid of everybody that had a mustache, So that was their and bringing on the Uber guitarist John Sykes. I mean, that was geared for the North American audience for sure.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's to me my favorite part of the book is the whole massive debacle and remixing and up in the middle that takes place with Slide It In and Whitesnake. I mean, those are two of the most complicated record-making sessions probably in the history of mankind. I mean, maybe Guns N' Roses in terms of
Chinese democracy.
Delays anyways. But
Martin, and fast forward to today, I mean, what do you think of, in your opinion, the sound of Whitesnake today compared to of old?
There are a certain class of bands out there that, they're doing what is sort of predicted and expected of them, but they're actually making their best music now compared to any time in the past. And I always argue with them that, Motorhead's last 5 albums, if you took any of those songs from these recent albums and parachuted them in and just dropped them into the middle of Ace of Spades or Overkill or Bomber, they would kick ass in every single way over every one of those songs. Whitesnake is kind of a band that is like that. I mean, no one gives any of these last two records any sort of credence. And they're not going to sell a lot of copies, and we know the whole industry has changed. But what he's decided to do is almost create the Whitesnake album on steroids, and that's what Forevermore and Good to Be Bad. I mean, these records are studded with massive productions and great playing, and they're heavy, and they're songs that, again, parachuted into certainly the middle of a record like Slip of the Tongue. These would be some of his best songs and greatest anthems of all time. but you can't go back. You can't compare 25 years later with the past. They're great albums. I could have given them a longer credence in the book, but there's a certain cool thing about writing about the golden period when the stakes were absolutely huge. Anyways, and everything that entails. These are great albums, and I want to make sure, and I made the point in the book that in certain ways, this is his best music ever, but it just doesn't matter.
But going back to Slide It In, I mean, my understanding at the time from all the books I've researched, John Sykes really didn't want to join the band. He was happy with Thin Lizzy. He was happy with Phil Lynott. He was going to do stuff with Phil Lynott solo. And they threw just so much money at him that it was a question of he could not say no.
Yeah, and I mean, he doesn't even sound like John Sykes on that album. Like I say, I mean, to me, it's closer to the second crossed with the third Twisted Sister album in a certain way. I mean, it's a big stereo rock album where everything is sort of pared down to a simple sort of 4/4 power chords we can all understand, stuff that's going to sound good on the radio, and importantly, stuff that's going to sound good live. This was a band, don't forget, that had a fair bit of it had rock royalty in it, but it also had a little bit of a critical mass going from being grandfathers of part of the new wave of British heavy metal, and then that crosses into the death of the new wave of British heavy metal with a very favorable metal environment in America with the rise of hair metal and MTV embracing all this stuff. And so, Whitesnake in 84, 85, 87 could do no wrong. They did great, as did other big British bands like Ozzy Osbourne and Def Leppard.
Talking about revelations, for you researching this book, what was the biggest revelation for you that people probably still don't know to this day, unless they read your book?
Yes.
Wow. I would say a very interesting part, I mean, I knew a little bit about this, is the battles between John and David, and how they were both kind of big divas in their different ways. And David never likes to be called a diva. He has certain things about him that are definitely very diva-like, but he also, he prides himself on his working class Northern England background. But he can be pretty demanding and full of himself, I suppose, in some ways as well. And he runs into this massive, odd personality in John Sykes, and wars ensue.
But to see that it went to the point where John, when David was having vocal problems recording 1987 or Whitesnake, whatever you want to call it, John even suggested, well, let's just go on without David. It's David's band. That's like Motorhead saying, well, we'll go on without Lemmy.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of presumption, a lot of
chutzpah.
Be careful of yourself, chutzpah, to be able to say that. Yeah, you're right, and obviously John has a real edge to him as well. I mean, he's probably saying that out of just trying to be provocative as well.
Alan, I got some great news for you.
Yes. Yeah.
Martin Popoff,
yes,
the author of Whitesnake, Sail Away, has generously, he's got a promo going. Martin, you want to talk about the promo? 30% off promo if people send you an email saying they saw this on the Metal Voice. Of course, one per person.
Yeah, I thought it was kind of cool. I mean, I get a kick out of when people listen to us, and I just figured let's run a little bit of a promo, a sale on this thing. So anybody who wants this book can have 30% off on it for the next 90 days. Just email me and we'll work out what that is, because obviously there's overseas, there's the US, there's Canada, but I'll just pop you back a quote saying PayPal me this amount, and it'll be 30% less of whatever it is in your territory. My email address is martinp@inforamp.net, martinp@inforamp, inforamp.net. So just email me, tell me that you listen to us blab away, but like three old ladies on the show, and I will strike you a deal on Sail Away, Whitesnake's Fantastic Journey.
See, I can't even get it right.
It was 30% off 90 days after this video has been posted.
There you
so
go.
We don't want people to call him up, 10 years later saying, "Hey, Martin."
It was worth the price of admission at full price. You got a special. It's a must-read from Martin Popoff, as always, as always. So you guys got to check it out. Take advantage of this situation because you will not be disappointed in reading this book and the history of Whitesnake.
All books must be sold. It's a blowout sale, Alan. It's a blowout sale.